Joe Biden has won the battle within his soul between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. Ethical adequacy has triumphed over Shakespearean thirst for power. And even if it took weeks of facts, pressure, embarrassment, devastating internal White House polls indicating a Trump landslide with House and Senate wipeouts, it is still vital to celebrate the virtue of abandoning power. This is a sacred act in a democracy, even if it's done imperfectly. I'm a British, not an American citizen, but even as a citizen of another state here on earth, I bow down to Joe Biden for abandoning power. It was a bad day for Trump, but it's still important to talk about beaten Trump, because even though a Trump victory is a little less certain now, it is still very likely. So here is something that I, as a political philosopher, without being a US citizen, know. In the age of democratic decline and distrust, you don't win by playing defense. You win by playing offense, which means that if they're going to win, the Democrats are going to have to be bold. Let's talk about this before we get to global consequences, Ukraine and Kremlin reaction. One thing being bold means is understanding that in the age of democratic decline, coronations without contestation are inherently dangerous. Why is that? Well, it's because people struggle to trust their institutions. Their institutions make them feel unsafe, powerless, betrayed, and sometimes even seem opaque, like you cannot make sense of them. So watching institutions anoint somebody, if their institutions you can neither see nor trust, is not a good experience. And this is where Barack Obama comes in, because Biden and the Clintons immediately endorsed Kamala Harris. But here is what Obama said. "We will be navigating uncharted waters in the days ahead, but I have extraordinary confidence that the leaders of our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges." In not so many words, this is Barack Obama, at least initially, calling for an open convention. Why is he doing that? First of all, because he is worried that Kamala Harris cannot beat Trump. Secondly, because he thinks that if she is to beat Trump, her best chance is to do this through a process of contestation out of which she comes out victorious. So what Obama is really saying is, don't let party unity undermine legitimacy that is generated by dynamic contest, and in turn leads to increased chance of victory. But let's say it is going to be Kamala Harris by whatever process. What does it mean for her to increase her chances of victory by being bold? We'll get to that, but first we need to look at what actually happened to Joe Biden's brain that made him step aside. In a way, I am uniquely positioned to talk about this because I'm not just a political philosopher, I'm somebody who has lived with a neurological condition for 20 years that for a few years stopped me from being able to talk, walk, or read. I was already worried about Joe Biden's cognitive decline before the 2020 election.
But despite his arrogance that's making him just try to ride over the fact that he is experiencing cognitive decline, he's also experiencing a lot of fear. He's often got this transparently fearful gaze, the way old people have when they're losing the plot. But then he's arrogant enough to just say, screw it, I can just ride through that too. So I'm just so familiar with all of this. I like Joe Biden so much, but he is disqualifying himself ethically. And he may just be lucky enough that the coronavirus stops him from being the man who,
through arrogance, got Trump a second term. Joe Biden did win, and he proved to be one of the most practically efficacious politicians in the Western world in the 2020s. However, his cognitive decline continued to get worse, making communication with the world, a central feature of the function of presidency, harder and harder. His experience of his cognitive decline was often about two things: fear and arrogance. The fear is about the sense that you are somewhere, but you stop being able to follow what is going on around you. And you could regularly see that fear in Joe's eyes. But at the same time, you could also see a kind of arrogance, which is all about the thought, well, yes, I have this cognitive decline, but I'm so used to power and practical politics that I can get away with it and continue to be a good politician making sound decisions. It's this confidence in himself as a practical politician, despite the cognitive decline, that led him to hope until the very end that he could have a second term. And it's only by a whisker, under a lot of pressure, that Joe Biden managed to avoid becoming King Lear. Oh, sir, you're old. Nature in you stands at the very edge of her confine. You should be ruled and led by some discretion that discerns your state better than you yourself. Now back to Kamala's need for boldness and the 6 things she needs to do to improve her chances. Number 1, Kamala needs 48 hours of communication training because she is a much nicer person than she comes across in public. Her contrived laughter could never be taken seriously on the doorstep.
You're gonna be the next president of the United States.
And her language regularly drifts far away from ordinary speech.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Her performances regularly give the impression, an unfair impression, of a sold-out technocratic centrist disrespecting stressed and busy voters. 2. Kamala Harris needs to reintroduce herself to the American people and retell her story as prosecutor, as senator, as VP, so that the country meets her again for the very first time, and attacks on her based on all of the caricatural viral videos flying around come to seem like they're no longer hitting the person that's really there. 3. Kamala Harris needs to increase her range. She needs to answer tough questions and have a vision, not just around immigration and crime, but around foreign policy and the international order. She needs to give a major speech on the global order to prove that she's able to stand up with clarity of vision to Putin and Xi. 4. Kamala Harris needs to have answers to the following 2 questions that are so powerful that they put Trump and Vance back on the defensive. The first question is, if Biden's cognitive decline is so bad, why doesn't he resign now? And the answer is that he probably should, but he isn't going to. So Kamala's answer needs to be, he was elected, he has stepped aside, and unlike you guys, he is a man who relinquishes power by putting the country first. The second question is, when did you first find out about Biden's cognitive decline and how long you've been lying to the country about it? And here the answer is, this is volatile, there is no date, but I'm going to defend Joe Biden's record. And now that Joe has stepped aside, we've only got one incoherent and elderly customer here, and it's Donald Trump. 5. Kamala Harris's VP pick, whether it's Buttigieg or Cooper or Shapiro, needs to be based on offense and not defense. It's not a safety first pick, it's a bold pick that's all about putting the other side on the defensive. In a dynamic of democratic decline, boldness is the best form of self-preservation. 6. She's got to hit Trump hard and be hyper-aggressive in going after the entrepreneurial superficiality of Vance, as well as trying to divide Vance and Trump. 7. A bonus tip. Even though Trump and Vance are semi-existential threats to democracy, it's a bad idea to center the political message that they are existential threats to democracy before the country. Because they're already calling you that. If you call them that back, you're actually accelerating democratic decline by pointing out something that is true. This is an important point to understand about sustenance of democracy. In other words, most of the time, when you're dealing with people who are treating you as an enemy, you've still got to, while hit them really hard on the issues and perhaps on their character, treat them as though they're your opponents, not your enemy. That isn't just about ethics. That actually increases the chances of not just sustaining your democracy, but in that particular instance, actually beating them. And now, moving toward Kremlin response and Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, I've got a quote for you. there should be an investigation into the collusion of US media and political circles that hid the truth about his mental state, Biden's mental state, by manipulating public opinion and playing along with one political party. Now, who do you think says this? It's Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for Russia's foreign ministry, which is a classic example of Russian propaganda, trying to pick on what already divides us and then exacerbating it. To understand where the Kremlin stands on Kamala Harris versus Trump, we've got to see that they're operating with two pillars. The first pillar is Trump, wanting Trump to win, and the second pillar is chaos. Let's start with Trump. In 2016, the Kremlin didn't actually want Trump to win. They wanted him to do well and end up weakening Hillary because they bought the centrist consensus, the illusion that Trump couldn't win. But in 2024, they think he can and will win, and they want him to, even though they do have reservations about the fact that his term in practice could prove less friendly to them than they would like. Then comes chaos, and chaos means two things. First of all, internal division in the run-up to the election. They want the Trump team to be having internal fights. They want the Democrats to be quarreling with each other. And they want the election to be close. The second thing they want is a post-election civic, democratic, and maybe constitutional crisis, whereby whoever wins, for them preferably Trump, is dealing with a loser who does not accept the result. One of the reasons the Kremlin want Trump to win is that they're entertaining the possibility of a Trump peace, a pause in the war in which a rump Ukraine is left unprotected from future Russian invasion. To understand properly why a peace like that is non-viable and would lead to bigger war in the future, watch this video next.